So our final guest is Suzette Harrison, and her book is based on, I believe, like the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 30s. And she's written several books. This is just her latest book, and it's called The Dust Bowl Orphans. And I see I had the books because our book club read this book for our June book, and we just discussed it a couple of weeks ago. So it got really, really high ratings. So everyone really loved the book. And we read your other book as well, The Girl at the Back of the Bus or something like that. So that was maybe last year, a while back. And welcome back to Black Authors Matter TV, because you were on the show maybe a year ago, maybe not even that long ago, with the other book that you had. And this one was recommended by a book club member. And we said, well, sure, her other book was really great. Let's try it. And I read it quickly, and it's kind of thick. It's on, well, 350 pages. So it's not, but it really, really is a compelling story. Different than others that have been told from a historical perspective. So that's enough from me talking. Suzette, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. I'm grateful and appreciative. Greetings from California.
Yeah. So,
California. So what is it? It's 9:30 here, so it's 6:30 there. Is it still daylight?
It is. It is still kind of bright out and hot, over 100 degrees.
we've had that in Houston for 2 weeks. Almost every day it's been either 100 or like 98 or 101. And we haven't had rain for 2 weeks. And it's really rough on your lawn, your grass, just or your the living things is hard. And even the animals, your pets and everything.
Absolutely.
So, but we really love the book, and it's about the Dust Bowls, um, starting in Oklahoma, but they don't stay in Oklahoma.
No, ma'am.
But that's where the story starts.
Well,
And I love this picture.
Can you explain the Dust Bowl?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. For most of us probably are familiar with it through Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. That's where most of our historical or literature comes from. But the Dust Bowl occurred in the early 1930s in Oklahoma and other southwestern states like Texas, for example. But what happened was when the crops, excuse me, not the crops, but the soil was over-tilled, overworked, and then on top of that, there was a drought for many years. So you had this dry soil that would just blow when the winds would come, because the plants were just devastated as a result of it as well. So there wasn't a lot of foliage, to keep the dirt down. But we're not talking about small little dust. I got some dust in my eyes. We're talking storms, storms that were so significant and large that the sky would darken. It could be broad daylight, and all of a sudden here comes this, they call them black blizzards, or that was one of the names by which they were called, because the soil in Oklahoma specifically was black. And so here comes this dust, and here comes this storm of wind, and all of the soils in the air. And just to give you a kind of perspective for those who weren't familiar with it, the dust would be so high sometimes that it would come up to the house roof. Imagine like a one-story house, dust piled all the way up to the roof in the aftermath of the storm. It would be so severe that sometimes children could not get home from school. If they were at school and one of the severe black blizzards blew in, they'd have to stay overnight sometimes just to let that blizzard clear. So crops were decimated, livestock was damaged. Of course, there's no, food for the livestock. So livestock was lost, lives were lost, families were decimated by these black blizzards. Think about farmers, for example, in the Dust Bowl Orphans in the book, the family, the Wilsons, they're farmers, but they can't farm because of these black blizzards and the droughts, etc. So it was a devastation that was natural in cause, but had great economic impact as well.
What made you focus on that, on the Dust Bowl
Well,
for your novel?
Yes, ma'am. The dedication is a clue. The dedication is to my maternal great grandparents, Samuel and Connie Johnson, who lived in Oklahoma. So that little town in the book Wellston, that's where my grandfather was born. And my grandfather lived in that. It's a literal town. That's not fictitious. My
Okay.
grandfather was born and lived in Wellston. And my great grandparents packed up our family around the same time that the Dust Bowl and the story occurs, and moved our family, migrated to California. So for me, it's an ode of honor and recognition back to my great grandparents for having the courage to leave home and to leave a place that no longer served or suited them or was beneficial for my family. And they had the courage during that time, the Depression, the Dust Bowl, to still move the whole family to California.
There was a lot that they were up against, and they were still able to persevere.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And they made it to Southern California. San Bernardino is, slightly mentioned in the book, and that's where
Mhm.
my family landed originally when we first got to California.
As I listened to you talk about the Dust Bowl, I mean, I experienced some of it. I'm former military. I was in the Army, and when we were stationed, when we went to combat, there were many times where we were stationed in the desert, and we remember those times when the dust would kick up like that, and the entire sky would go dark. And it happened so many times, we would just have fun with it. Say, okay, there's another sandstorm. Let's go take a picture in it, because it would be so. I mean, the sand would be so high. So as you were talking, that's what I was picturing. And so if it was any worse than that, I can imagine what they had gone through at that time.
I think that's a wonderful analogy, example, Dr. Lawson, because that's what most of us can visualize is the more contemporary aspects of, dust storms. And since we've been, in Afghanistan and other places, that is a good way to think about it. But yeah, we're talking severe black. Just imagine that dust that you saw, but black, and it's in your throat and it's in your eyes. Your eyes are running, and you have these, they called it black pneumonia. It was so bad it would give, people pneumonia. So yeah, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. I remember that you'd be a whole different color. You take a shower and all of that. Yes. So tell us you're probably
Go ahead, Rhonda. Go ahead,
I
'cause
was
I
just
can
gonna
hold
say,
mine.
tell us a bit more about the story. We're talking children of the Dust Bowl. So let's talk a bit about the children.
Absolutely. So even on the cover, you see the depiction of two sisters or two girls, and those girls are sisters. The older one is Faith. She's 15 when the novel opens, and then her baby sister is Hope, and she's 5 when the novel opens. So this story starts on April 14th, 1935, and it's an actual incident that happened. It's recorded in history as the worst dust storm in US history.
Wow.
So you have these two girls, they're on the eve, or excuse me, on the tail of a family tragedy, which I won't, spoil.
Don't reveal. I won't do a spoiler.
No spoilers. It's a family tragedy, and now the family is picking up and migrating to California. But again, it's April 14th, and in out of nowhere comes this sudden black storm, this black blizzard, and Hope and Faith, the two little girls on the cover, they get separated from their family. And that's how the story opens. Can you imagine? I can't imagine being 15 years old with my 5-year-old sister out in the middle of a black storm, and then they have to take cover. And when they come out of taking cover, their family is nowhere to be seen. I can't imagine that kind of situation.
I don't want to imagine.
Yeah, I don't want to imagine.
Yeah.
You're right. And then put on top of that, think about it, it's 1935, it's Oklahoma, the Midwest, Mid-South rather, or Southwest, pardon me. And there's Jim Crow, and there's racism, and there's a lack of safety. They didn't have a cell phone that they could just pick up, mama, here I am back here, come back and get me, daddy, come get me. They didn't have that technology. And here they are isolated from their family. What do we do now?
Mm-hmm.
You painted the picture so well with how they got, how the storm came about, how Faith and Hope were together and battling against the dust blizzard, the black blizzard, and then how they ended up seeking shelter. I won't spill all the details. And then and that was very realistic. The picture you painted about them finding the shelter, but it's black, it's dark because of the dust. So you have to, they're in something unfamiliar where they have to try to figure out their bearings and so forth. And then they think they hear their family voices, and then they find out it's not. So anyway, that's all I'm gonna say about it. But it's really, really a great book. Like I said, it got a very high rating from everybody in the club. Everybody, it got a very high rating. And I want to ask a question. This picture is just really just beautiful. It's just depicting it. It's such a beautiful, accurate depiction from the clothes. Now, is this based on a photograph, or is this an illustration that someone created from pictures from the period?
So that the graphic artist from my publisher created that. I can take no credit for it, but when I first saw it, I thought it was beautiful. I love the sky, the colors. I love even in the clothing that Faith Hope are wearing. I thought that captured their essence, and even some of the things that they go through with regards to that kind of crazy looking hem on Faith's dress.
Yes.
I read it, know what I'm referring to.
Right.
And standing in the roadway, just looking down the distance with no one else out there, I thought the graphic artist captured that beautifully.
Yeah. He or she did. Was it a male or female?
That, I don't know, in all honesty, but, again, that's the publisher.
Publishers.
Right. Choose the graphic artist to do the cover.
But yeah, even down to her socks.
Yeah.
And the shoes they wore. I mean, this is really just perfect.
Yeah, those socks, those shoes, honey, they are cute.
Back then people only had one pair of shoes. If they had one, I mean, a lot of poor people, if they had one, a lot of times in the summer, they didn't really have shoes. They would have shoes for the wintertime. That happened with poor people who lived in rural areas that just use their feet. And they lived in nature, so they didn't necessarily, everybody needs shoes, but they could make it work. They had to make it work. They didn't have any choices. So this book came out what month?
February of this year.
Okay, so I knew it was new, but I hadn't heard about the book until our book club member recommended it.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Yeah, then we all said yes, and then we all read it, and then I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So now, are all of your books historical?
No, not all. I would say five? I think 5 out of,
because we read 3. We read Taffy a while back.
Right, a long time ago.
And then we read the one before, The Girl in the Back of the Bus, and this one. And they're all historical from different periods, though.
That's my love, and that's my passion. I write contemporary. I've written romance. I've written even a children's book. But that African-American history, that is my passion. And I feel like that's where I go home and I get to sit with my ancestors and I get to hear their stories, and I get to let them feed through me and to flow through me. That's where I feel like that's my space.
Is there a process that you have when you get ready to write, especially when you're writing your historical fiction?
Absolutely, Dr. Rhonda. So a lot of research. This book that's coming out in September, talk about research. I had probably 10, 11, 12 tabs open at all times on my computer while
writing. Computer every day.
You understand?
Yes.
So with historicals, for me, although it's fiction, I have some license, I still must ground it in that time period.
Yes.
So, like we're talking about the Dust Bowl Orphans, if Faith pulled out a cell phone, oh, wait a minute, there weren't cell phones doing this. So you want to avoid those anachronisms and make sure that it's grounded. So my process is a lot research, taking lots of notes. Even in this book that's coming out in September, I created a spreadsheet there was just so much detail that I wanted to capture. So I always strive to bring authenticity, and so that the book reads authentically, and that you feel like you've been taken, the reader feels like they've been taken to another time, they've been transported. So research, I'll listen to the music of the period, I'll listen to even maybe a radio, if there is a radio broadcast of the period, look up newspaper clippings. I myself try to immerse myself as much as possible in whatever the era is that I'm writing, and I try to divorce myself of my contemporary ideologies and my contemporary thinking and my contemporary experiences as much as possible, unless those experiences serve the story somehow, some way. Otherwise, I try to divorce and disconnect myself
Does
from
that mean no TV, no music, nothing that's contemporary while you're writing?
Exactly, exactly. So just, it's like an immersion, just go all in into that period. And when I'm writing, I'll have maybe instrumental ambient music in the background, because it helps me to focus. But otherwise I disconnect. I'm not a big TV watcher anyhow. I have my, favorite shows that I might watch. So it's easy for me to disconnect and not feel like I'm missing out on TV or the world. And to tell you the truth, I love going back in time. I love going back to and imagining what was it like. Even the language was different. The lingo is different.
Yeah.
So how to capture that, and sometimes I can't always capture it through research. Pardon me. So I have to use my imagination. I try to remember the way my grandparents spoke, or the crazy things, funny things my mama still says, and to try to pull them as references, so that, like I said, as much as possible, I can weave an authentic, genuine sounding story.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Well, it's definitely that. It
Yeah.
takes you back to the time, and each of the scenes that you write, you're propelled back to that time. You can really imagine yourself in the situations you describe, and the way that Faith, who's the main character, well, most of the narrative flows through Faith. The way she responds to situations that she encounters, you think to yourself, would I respond the same way? What would I have done under those circumstances? And a lot of times what we have to do is divorce ourselves from the way we would respond now versus the way we would have had to respond in 1930, whatever, because that's a whole different thing. And that's why when people say, I'm not my ancestors, they have those shirts. I think that's totally disrespectful, because if you were your ancestors and you did what you did now, you'd be dead. So, I mean, if you did that back then, you would have been killed immediately or violated in some way. You wouldn't have been able to, and it's not that they didn't want to fight back. They just had to fight back in the most wise way to preserve their lives and their families' lives. They had to figure out how to navigate all of this and still move forward. And that took a lot of faith and prayer and fight. But they had to fight smartly.
Exactly. And like Dr. Rhonda said, I hate that slogan. I hate that saying. I feel it is disrespectful. It's totally disrespectful. It's like we are here because our ancestors did what they had to do.
Right.
And without their struggle, we wouldn't be here to be able to make those kind of arrogant statements.
Right.
And
exactly.
Statements. And again, we're, like you said, we're using our current sensibilities. Oh, I wouldn't take that, and I wouldn't do this, that. You would do whatever you had to do to survive. And
I used to say that whenever I would watch civil rights movies with my mom or with my grandmother, and something would happen to say, I would have said such and such, and my grandmother would just like, no, you wouldn't have. That's all she said about it. I'm like, okay. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. We stand on the back of their freedom and struggle And now we can make these big, bold, bad statements. But had we been there in the time, we would have done what we needed to survive. Some of us fought
Right.
and died. Some of us fought and survived. And like you said, we used different strategies. It
Right.
wasn't always aggressive in the face. We
Right.
worked the system, for our own good. So no, I disavow those statements. I
Right.
just like them.
We don't realize the strength that it took not to do something.
Right.
We think that we had to do something to show power, but it showed power often to not do anything. Because had that father decided to fight back, he probably could have put his entire family at risk. He had to think about all those other things that took a lot more precedence than his pride.
That's right. And there's even a scene in the book where something happens to Faith, where she's accosted by a gang of peers and they, attack her and assault her. And she, in that moment, has to make a choice not to fight back just to save herself and her sister.
And her sister. Mhm. And that's very real. Just thinking back, just about some people that we've heard about historically. For example, Strom Thurmond, who was a senator from South Carolina for, I don't know how many years he was in the Senate, but a long time, because when he died, he was like 90, he was barely able to walk. He was like 97 or something like that. But he had a daughter, a Black daughter, with her mother was either 15 or 16 cleaning his house, and he raped her. He raped her, and the result was a daughter that he did not acknowledge in public ever. But I read her biography. She died not that long ago.
Right.
daughter.
She was actually interviewed not long after his death.
Right. That's when she came out. After he died, she came out and told her story. And he actually financed her education and would, give her money, have her come to his office, but never as his daughter. He would never publicly acknowledge that. But that's what her mother couldn't have fought back. What could she do? She was working there as a maid. He had the power.
Absolutely.
And she couldn't tell him, she couldn't turn him into the police. I mean, she had no options. Right. She had no options.
Right. And I think that's a wonderful tie back to the Dust Bowl Orphans. You see that Faith doesn't have a lot of options. She doesn't have a lot of self-agency. Right. She has to make choices that are available to her. And she's even confronted with a sexual situation where she is being asked or to do certain things, and she finds a way out, and she, thankfully finds a way of escape. But it wasn't always the case historically. So, that was very a touchy point for me, because I even had the discussion with my editor, and try not to do spoilers, but she wanted them to actually, get married, and like, that's not that's not resting well with me. Okay, they get married, but are they going to consummate? And I'm not going to say anything. I'll let the reader go find out if they do or if they don't. But that didn't sit well with me. I'm like, I can't write sexual violation of Black women. I just our history is too rife with it. So I'm so glad that Faith found a way to do what she had to do.
Yeah, and the way that they were able to escape their situation, but it was very harrowing and these are children. Right. That's the thing you have to keep in mind. And she's having to try to figure things out really as an adult, even though she's only 15, thrust into a situation that, I was wondering to myself, if this was me, how would I handle it? And you have to think about more than yourself. You have to think about this, your 5-year-old sister. And you did an amazing job of writing the character. You really wrote her just well. The whole thing, but the story moves through Faith. And so that's really, it was just a great book.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. And, I drew on the women in my life to be able to form her character, to form her strength, to form her tenacity. I was able, to draw on my matrilineal line. And, I feel a lot of my mother in Faith and her tenacity and her strength and her power. I feel that, I was able to put that into Faith because I've seen it myself. I've, lived with a woman who was tenacious. But like you said, Miss Gwen, if it were me, Hope and I would still be stuck in that cellar because I wouldn't know what to do.
No, it was very harrowing. I mean, it's you had a lot of action, but it was not the kind of action like fighting or anything like that. You had a lot of action in terms of the situation that they were in and the different things they had to go through. It was really, and Kay, who is in the book club, she was telling me we read the book in May, but I read it in January, I think, or February, whenever it came out. And then, no, I'm getting mixed up with the previous book. I read this book a month ago. But she said amazing writing. That's what Kay said. It was the writing is just incredible. So you said you're working on another book. You're always working on books.
We're in the editing process right now.
Okay.
And that comes out in September. And it's the same kind of dual timeline like the Dust Bowl Orphans and The Girl at the Back of the Bus, where you have a contemporary and a historical character and narrative running side by side. And I like to kind of think of them like trains on a parallel track that eventually, meet and connect. So that one will come out on September 6th, and it's called My Name is Ona Judge. And for those who don't know, Ona Judge was an actual person. So that's why this book was harder. Like I said, Dr. Rhonda, I had 11, 12. We're doing research.
I can imagine it.
She's based on a real living character, or someone who, a true person is based on a true story. So I was even more so dedicated to accuracy as much as possible and just research. Oh my goodness, up the yin yang. But for those who don't know, Ona Judge was an enslaved lady's maid to Martha Washington, the first lady of the United States of America.
Oh,
we're going to find out about Ona's life and who she was. And that's what that book is all about. And then, of course, it has a contemporary character and who finds something out about Ona. And, we'll see that that quilting, I like to call it that connecting and that overlapping and how they connect.
Well, I can't wait to read it and to let people know how they can get the Dust Bowl Orphans or any of your books.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
Connect with you via social media.
Yes, ma'am. I am on Facebook, Suzette D. Harrison Books. You can obtain the books through my website, of course, through Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. My website is sdhbooks.com. So, and then as far as Instagram, I'm Suzette Harrison 2200. And I love connecting with readers. So please feel free to connect with me and reach out anytime. That's one of the hidden joys of being an author, is being able to touch and connect with live human people who love to read books as much as I love to read and write books. So that is a joy for me, and I mean that sincerely.
Beautiful.
Okay, well, thank you for being a guest again on the show. And we look forward to hearing about your upcoming book and having you back again.
Thank you so much, ladies. I appreciate your time, and it's always a joy, an honor, and a privilege, and blessings to you both. And thank you.
And blessings to you as well. You have a great night, and thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good night, ladies.
Good night.